My name is Scott Roxborough. I'm the European bureau chief for the Hollywood Reporter, and we're here at the Cannes Investors Circle. We're looking in the couple of panels that we're doing at investment challenges and opportunities in the independent space in the US and Europe, and increasingly between the two, because that's something that's happening a lot more now. We were just hearing the last panel about the film Cuckoo, which Waypoint and Neon did as a US-German co-production. That's something that's become very common now, or more common. But one of the aspects of independent production and financing that would seem to be a huge opportunity for independent filmmakers here in Europe is accessing private equity. Private equity, whether it's high wealth individuals or funds or other models, is something that's very commonly used in the US, is very, very rare in Europe. It happens. The people on the panel here are folks who deal with private equity, investing in European or independent films. But it's still very, very rare. And I would even say the culture of filmmaking in Europe hasn't quite got its head around private equity, my opinion. But I'll see what our panelists think. Basically, give a round of applause for the two panelists. First the applause, and then I'll introduce them. Mikael, I'm going to mispronounce your name terribly. Sorry, I can't get Swedish names right. Mikael Fellenius, is that? Fellenius. Oh God, we could be here all day. Fellenius from Filmivast, CEO of Filmivast. Filmivast is a publicly funded private investor. Is that sort of right? It's like a region of Sweden that invested. Give me your accurate description.
Is that? Well, that's pretty much correct. But when it comes to private equity, we do private equity pro rata pari passu. You all know what that is, but it's soft.
Okay.
We're very kind, so I'll come back to that.
It's all right. And have invested in hundreds of films, but most recently films like Triangle of Sadness, Ruben Östlund's new film, The Entertainment System's Down, which will star Kirsten Dunst, Keanu Reeves, and Daniel Brühl, investors in that. But even also Nuri Bilge Ceylan's last film, what was it called? The dry grasses, about dry grasses, which was in Cannes last year. Invest small equity parts sometimes in films, and to sort of facilitate these independent productions and allow them to sort of get started. And you come in very, very early often.
We do.
Yeah. And to my right is Céline Dornier. Is that all right pronunciation?
Almost, yeah.
Almost. Of Logical Pictures, French-based a group with investors in equity in independent productions. They are an investor in Emile Perez, which is the Jacques Audiard film starring Céline Gomez, which is here in competition, and a number of other productions. Both of you guys are in that space of investing, taking private equity and putting it into independent, often European productions. Why do so few private equity investors do that? Why is there so little private equity investment in European film compared to US?
And if I may, we also have one project in common, Pleasure by Ninja Seberg. Yeah.
Okay.
We worked on it. We didn't really work together, but we are both on it. There's this one as well. I completely agree with you. It's a matter of culture. I think it's just not part of the European culture to finance with private equity. I think it's growing. I think it's getting more and more known, but it's not part of the culture also because it wasn't really needed so far, because there is a lot of public funds or distribution to finance films. But that also means that those films had to remain in a certain level of budget, and also to remain a certain type of films. So private equity is here to also give more freedom to some projects, and I think it's growing. I think it's still pretty new, but it's growing.
And what kind of opportunity is there? I mean, what sort of potential is there in the private equity space? How much money are we talking about that is there as a potential for filmmakers to access if they can get them interested, if the structures can be put in place, if the culture can be changed a bit so the producers know how to work with these people?
Well, let me begin with saying that the lack of real private investors, private equity, is because mostly and for a long time European film has been very heavily subsidized. So I hope and no one takes offense now, but it makes it also a little bit too comfortable to get the film financed.
European producers are lazy, essentially.
No. Sorry. No, not at all. They're working hard because the structure of the financing in a normal European movie is very fragmented. Up to I've seen projects we've been into up to let's say 14 investors. Some of them soft money, some of them private equity like us. But remember, the private equity. When we say private equity, we put in $1 million, maybe $2 million in a larger feature movie, or 2 million euros. Then we do expect the same conditions as a private investor would do, but if we don't get recoupment on all that money, we're fine. We gain other values to the fund that we run. So it's a little bit different with private equity in Europe. It is there, and most regional film funds are structured in a way that they have to do private equity. They can't give support, soft money, like the most of these film institutes in Europe do. They put in soft money and they have expectations, but they don't have any ownership in the film. We do, and you do. So we have our part and we recoup, but it's not that easy to show the numbers to real business angels, if you call them that. A wealthy person that would go into the audiovisual sector or the film industry and say, I would like to invest. So what are the numbers? And that's where it begins. That's what makes it really hard.
Well, why is that? Is it because the numbers are smaller, or is it because European film doesn't tend to do as well as U.S. indies? Although on the panel just before this, we heard in some ways the exact opposite. Neon saying actually independent European film is doing really well at the box office in the U.S. right now, and low budget U.S. films are very difficult to get equity investors for. Yeah. So, but I'm wondering, is it just because European film doesn't have the global appeal of the U.S., or is there something to do with, I don't know, how European producers and filmmakers are pitching their projects or explaining it or even understanding the value of what they have, since they're used to having things subsidized and I'm not saying it's an easy model, but it's not one where you have to think as much about how much is this film worth.
Yeah, it's a combination of all of that. But for sure, I think it's a much smaller market. We are operating mostly with companies that are aiming for a small market. Like Sweden is a small country, 10 million inhabitants. Denmark, half of that. Norway, about the same, for example. But there are, of course, a lot bigger countries in Europe. But still, American producers, they could survive only, let's say, on the American market. 300 million people living there, and still a very good infrastructure with theaters, cinemas. So we're talking completely different numbers in the theatrical window to begin with. So that's what makes it a little bit different in pitching to a private investor. Well, this is the market, this is our target group. We can come back to that one. But I think Americans are much better in explaining to the private equity investor, a real one. This is the market, and this is the target group, the focus group, the niche audience that we would like to reach out with this movie. I think there's a big difference there.
Yeah, I can get you in as well, Céline. I mean, what could producers in this room or European financiers learn from their American counterparts about, I don't know, how to pitch to private investors? I mean, what is there a different way to speak? Do they speak a different language than, say, the film boards or the subsidy boards?
Yeah, I think it's different because when you talk to subsidies or public funding, then you have to focus more on the need for the film to exist and the need in terms of cultural and creative aspects, because that's what subsidies are there for. They are there to help those films get to life. When, of course, investors will need to look more at numbers and at the commercial value. So I think there is something to learn there, because Europeans are used to talk to public financing again. But I think it's not just this. I think it's also a matter of network, just like of knowing how to work with private funds, because all those markets have been closed on themselves quite a lot. Like in France, we usually most of the time produce for France, like you were saying for the US as well, actually. I think that's what's changing as well. I think the US being weaker at the moment are also looking at other territories. That's what they were saying on your previous panel. I think that's also part of the market changing thanks to platforms being more international. But to answer your question, I think so. Yeah, there's a different way to talk to private equity investors for sure. Like getting to know the market a bit better and getting to know like how the film could perform a bit better. But also, I think European producers, European filmmakers shouldn't just look at the US as a model on its own. I think what we have in Europe is amazing. Like we can finance through a lot of different kinds of channels. I think the key here is really to combine all those type of financing. It's in the US, and again, they were just saying it in your panel, having just equity is really hard to raise, when in Europe we can have a mix of a bunch of different things, having a bunch of soft money distribution, and then that makes the equity partner less at risk because there is less to recoup, and so it makes it easier. And thanks to the international potential with international sales agents, for example, then you can make it like stronger and more potential for sales.
Do you have a sort of good example of that, of recent? Are there a project you've done or another one done out of Europe and that does mixed models?
Well, Pleasure is a great example. Pleasure was financed through a bunch of different countries locally. It was financed through public funding, distribution, soft private equity, and us, and international MG. And in the end, our amounts with the international MG was really small compared to the budget, so that made it less risky for us and more comfortable, but still allowed the filmmakers to have a bit more budget. So that's a perfect example for us that really works.
And is there any? I mean, Josh Rosebud from Waypoint was saying doing his co-production, investing equity in a European-U.S. co-production was challenging because even something like getting the budget level was difficult because soft money contributors say, well, give us the budget, we'll tell you how much soft money we'll give you. I say, well, if we know how much soft money we have, we can tell you what our budget will be. And so that was back and forth. Are there particular challenges to doing these mixes of soft money and equity, particularly if you're moving between, I don't know, Europe and the US?
Yeah, the problem is with the US because there's no treaty with the US. So what they were talking about earlier, co-producing with Germany, for example, they talked about Germany. That works because Germany is one of the only countries that allows co-productions with the US. It's a long story, it's a bit technical, but it's really easy to have European projects, European productions, getting US equity on board, but the other way around is a bit trickier because it's just how it is built at the moment politically. It's hard to have co-productions with the US. It's not impossible, again, with Germany, for example, but it's much, much harder. So it's harder for Americans to get European money, but for Europeans to get equity, it's more about, I think, getting the network.
And is there no particular challenge of doing the sort of mixed combinations of taking equity, soft money, subsidies? Is that a particular challenge in making European films, or is it a fairly straightforward procedure once you understand how these different groups work?
I think Josh also said something about you have to have the networks and know the people that are raising money from, let's say, film institutes in each country and whatever other financing sources. So coming from maybe America as a producer doing this work, it's a little bit more challenging than for a European producer that has a very established, I guess, network and more easy access to different financiers. So yes, in that perspective, I think it's more challenging for an American producer doing that setup with, but it's not impossible. It works, of course.
Are there any downsides to getting an equity piece into your film? Any particular challenges in terms of, you know, the kind of projects you can make work, or even, the waterfall at the end, or giving up rights or so forth? Or
Yeah, well, yeah, of course, then it's more expensive, first of all, so equity needs to recoup. And it's also a bit more challenging, I think, in terms of cash flowing, because it's not as stable as a public fund or something that's really institutional. But beyond this, there are some risks and challenges, but I think it's a really interesting way to build things, because, again, it gives more opportunity. So I wouldn't really see it as a challenge as a whole. I think it's really a plus to have some equity in the middle and to combine everything.
And is it the case that any project sort of certain size can use equity as a piece, or are there particular types of films, particular genres, particular budget levels that particularly work well with sort of equity pieces within Europe?
Well, yeah, genre could be a good, in terms of creatives only, because genre is getting more and more. Well, it's always been really international, but it's growing as well because the audience is also getting younger, and because it's getting more and more recognized in general, I think. But for me, it's more a matter of language. It needs to travel enough for equity partners to feel safe with their recoupment. In terms of budget, we have a bunch of different examples, either on like small budget where it's really easy, around 3 million, it's really easy. You can get a bunch of soft money, and then it's easy to find the investor. And if it's bigger, we have examples at like 10 million budget films where there is just a couple of million that is equity, thanks to the money we can raise in Europe. Higher than this, there will be more equity, so it gets a bit more risky, so it's a bit harder, but it's still possible.
But so like the level of equity that an independent producer or filmmaker could probably get out of Europe would be in the 1 to 2 million range for a budget of like 10 million? Would that be so?
Well, if you manage to get it well, which is not easy, it's pretty technical, but you can make it work,
And you mentioned Netflix or the streamers from the side that they've sort of broadened the audience for international films, for European films. They've also made a lot of investment within Europe. They've made a lot of investment in local production. They're picking up films. They're financing films. Do you see that as just a general net benefit for the production in Europe? Or are there any, downsides or problems? Because we were just saying in the last panel, the U.S. market was very influenced by how Netflix, invested heavily, bought up everything, and then pulled out very quickly as well, sending the market into sort of a tailspin. Is that a danger that you see happening within the European context as well, that these platforms could decide, oh, my share price is going down, I'm just going to slash all production and not buy any European films anymore? Do you see that as a potential danger?
I think there are several upsides and some downsides as well. But no, I think there are several films that has been possible and come through thanks and due to Netflix. Just we give you the money up front, one-stop shop, no problems, no worries. But initially it was all the discussion about who is owning the intellectual property and so on. I think it changes, and I think the discussion of sharing a little bit more the long term, the back end, when you can make great success on Netflix, you also will be able to take part of a little bit back end, So I think that the model from Netflix has changed, but
sorry, is Netflix doing a lot more back-end deals? Because I haven't heard much of that happening.
I've heard about some, not so many yet, but I definitely heard that there are many, a few more business models that they can apply to producers when they take them on board. Not just giving the money and say we own it all, and you just do your job. It's a little bit different now. But I think definitely it's made a lot of very nice projects come through and be alive that we've turned down even. So it's not just competition. They've done some really good development from projects that has been turned down from the traditional financing structure. So they're taking big risks, but that's how they work.
Can I ask both of you, because I think I'm looking at it, just a few more minutes. when you look at models, you talked about a couple of the models, like for pleasure or so forth. Do you see any sort of interesting new combinations or models? We talked about Céline Gachet was supposed to be at the keynote, but she had to run. They've started up this new studio model, Carousel, which will have equity money, huge stars running it, and apparently attracting new stars. Is that an interesting model, sort of an artist-led model with equity that you see could work in Europe? I'd be interested to know what models you're seeing that you think, okay, that is something that's filling a gap that could really be a future for independent European film.
Well, we have a pretty similar model because as Carousel, we have a few different activities. For us, it's different companies, but we work together around talents the same way they are. So I think that's really key because talents are everything. So I think, first of all, it allows us to turn around talents and make sure that we don't lose talents to platforms, which happens sometimes, but also that we can offer different types of structure, either through sales plus financing or through distribution plus production. Or I think it's a great way to be stronger and have different opportunities to offer talents and to make sure because to answer your questions just before, for me, platforms are a competitor in terms of talents and in terms of being the first ones or us being the first ones to get to the project. Of course, it's a bit different for the producer. When you're with the platform, you have less creative freedom, but it's also really safe for producers to do the project. So it's also a great way to remain with talents, to remain close to them and make sure we offer as many opportunities as they will need.
And are there any other models that you're seeing emerging? Other companies that are doing that are combining equity with sort of traditional European models of subsidies and soft money that you see as very promising, that are sort of breaking new ways? I'm thinking of things like Anton or whatever. Do you see any new models coming up? Because it seems to me that equity, which used to be, a very small type of a small number of companies, that a lot more companies, European companies, seem to be getting into this space. You see a lot more entertainment companies getting interesting and accessing equity. Do you see any interesting models out there that you could recommend people to look at as, as potential future production structures or strategies? Other than yours, of course, which is, our, Class A and,
I don't think there are many still. I think it's pretty rare in Europe to have this like private equity capacity. But special types, like special models, I can't think of anything. You talked about Carousel, Anton, as I don't see. For me, the key is always to mix production, to be as close as possible to production. But yeah, more and more people are doing it, but it's not really, I can't talk of a new model really. Do you have something in mind?
Not so much. The only thing I'm interested in is looking at companies that are, there's this one, what's the equity company that bought in, but they bought Square One, which was an independent distributor in Germany, and they bought a rights library now, Telepool, also in Germany, but it's equity backed. They are producers. Square One's also a distributor, and so they'll be doing, I think, with Telepool as a library, we'll be doing sales as well.
Yeah, so you're right. So it's the same model. Yeah, it's what we just talked about. You're right. There is another one.
Yeah, and is that a key element we talked about on the last panel with Waypoint and Neon, getting an access to distribution, at least in the major territory. Is that a key thing for a lot of, for your productions or for your structure to have distribution in place, at least in the major territory?
Yeah, it always helps. It can be a plus with equity. It's another way to finance the project while keeping the rights in-house or with good partners, and it's a way for us to build. We work with a bunch of different partners in different countries, ours obviously in France, but also in other territories, so we can kind of like sell, distribute, and finance at the same time. So it's what I was saying. It's more opportunities, more ways, more solutions to find to work on a project and make it happen.
Well, can I ask just to finish, again, looking just in the future, a year or two, because things change quickly, where do you expect the European industry to be in 1-2 years when it comes to equity players within the independent film space? Do you expect to see sort of more consolidation of large companies falling together? Do you expect to see equity rise up and play a much larger role, or are we going to be more or less the same space in 2 years' time? Because things tend to move a bit slower in Europe than in the US.
I guess we need to see, but we can see more consolidation, absolutely. But I also, I think it's a little bit problematic with the overproduction. There are made around 2,000 feature movies in only Europe, and who's going to see all the movies? That's a fact. That's a little bit of a challenge. Saying that, I think higher ambitions, fewer feature films, with higher budgets, can open up for a new way of private equity to see the attraction and also the value, if we are getting better explaining that to them. And I have one party trick that you can say to a private investor. Let's say we have a 10 million euro movie. Let's do the math. And half of it, 5 million, is subsidized from soft money. And you tell the private equity, come in with 1 million euro, and we double it for you. Because that's what happened. You own 20% with only 10% of the total financing. Isn't that good? I mean, I could sell it right now.
Oh, I can get my check. Okay. And also, Céline, I mean, how you predict in a year, 2 years' time, where do you think the market will be here in Europe when it comes to private equity and film investment?
I think it's growing. I think it has been growing. It's a bit slow. You're right. It's Europe. But I think it's growing because there is a bit less public funding, first of all, and also because the market is opening. We heard and we know that the US market is a bit weaker as well, so it's looking a bit more at Europe. So it makes it grow by itself. So I think it's changing in the right direction, because that doesn't mean that the US is just like coming over here. It means more partnership, more knowledge between Europe and the US, when the US used to be a bit like unaware of what was going on in Europe. So that's more access for Europeans and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's growing. It's hard to predict the market because I didn't know that the US market would have troubles now. And we, of course, didn't expect anything with COVID. That changed a lot of things. And we don't, in terms of politics, in France, it's really different from the rest of the world, so I can't really talk for everyone, but politically, things can change a lot as well, because in France, for example, we have those rules to make sure that the money that platforms are making is somehow reinvested on production, so this can also change a lot.
One of the reasons why, France still rules when it comes to, if not cinema in general, but then definitely, independent cinema, the envy of the world.
You have big money.
Well, thank you both for joining us. Thank you all for listening. Please applause for the Väst panel. And for those of you taking part in the pitching sessions, good luck. Otherwise, for all of you, have a great rest of your market and a great festival. Thanks so much.